Now, this week's extra one-on-one with Green Party co-leader Chlöe Swarbrick on her response to the Finance Minister's view on the economy. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora, Bomber. Thanks for having me.
Chloe, your thoughts on the economic optimism of the Finance Minister. Is she displaying the power of positive thinking or a delusional disconnect with reality?
Oh, well, it's important to be positive and to be aspirational. I just wish that married with reality. What we have here is a finance minister and a government with a kind of fiscal strategy and economic strategy where they are starving the economy and pretending that is the recipe for growth. And I just actually want to respond to those points that she was raising
Please.
About the things that I will apparently say with regard to this apparent magical money tree, and also some of the statements that she made about the wealthy supposedly paying their fair share at the moment. Look, we know from obviously research from 2023 from the IRD, the High Wealth Individuals Report, that back then, and this is really important because that's a timestamp in 2023, the wealthiest 311 households at that point in time held a collective wealth that was more than the bottom 2.5 million New Zealanders.
Right.
And that was found not to be a mistake or an accident, but a consequence of a tax system that sees those at the top pay half the effective tax rate on their income, be that derived from wealth or from regular PAYE, as regular people do, pay half the effective tax rate of everybody watching and listening to this, of the average hardworking New Zealander, of our firefighters and our nurses and our hairdressers and our doctors and our teachers and everybody who works for a living. That is part of the reason that the Greens obviously have so consistently put forward the proposals for a wealth tax, because we believe that whether you are making your money from sitting on a pile of treasure or from going out and actually doing that hard work, then you should be paying your fair share to contribute to society.
Amen.
Not only is the current setup fundamentally unfair, but it is also robbing us of the resources necessary to fix our infrastructure, to bring our country back together, to fix our hospitals and our schools, and to rebuild that sense of social cohesion and the national identity. But I just make the point that Nicola Willis has managed to find that magic money tree when it comes to the $12 billion for new military spending, for $3 billion tax breaks to landlords. Maybe the magic money tree comes in the form of some of our lowest paid hard-working women who this government stole $12 billion from in the form of the pay equity settlements.
Thank you. The richest 1% of New Zealand households own 18.8% of total net worth, while the bottom 50% of households together hold less than 3% of total net wealth. How is it that level of inequality in a country that once prided itself on egalitarianism even possible?
Well, I think that unfortunately for my entire lifetime, we seem to have accepted the kind of neoliberal project, which will be very familiar with Martin, that there apparently is no alternative, when in fact we know that is frankly not the case, not least in recent living memory where we saw an alternative pre the 1980s. But that is not, again, in any way, shape or form to say that those were the beautiful good old days and that everything was rosy. Of course, there are lessons that we can learn from the past, but we need to consider the context of the modern day and the technological advancements and all of the benefits that regular hardworking people should also be reveling in, and we should be moving our society forward. So I guess that this is where it really comes down to, and this is actually a point that I've proffered to a few different business audiences that I've been in front of, most recently this morning, the Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce and Business New Zealand just last week, where I really ask those who represent the business community to contribute positively to the debate that we seem to be having in an incredibly narrow and binary and actually quite dumb, really, really stupid way at the moment as a country. The debate on debt, for example, tends to be debt is bad or debt is good. The debate on tax seems to be tax is good or tax is bad, as opposed to tax and debt are tools. How are we going to use them, and what are the kinds of outcomes that we're actually looking for here? Because one thing that Minister Willis might not like me to make a point of, which I did last week when we were doing the annual review debates in Parliament, and she decided to make the point that I was a socialist for arguing that, God forbid, we ensure that everybody has their basic needs met in this country of abundance. But all I was really pointing to is the fact that we can in fact use debt in the way that many businesses do in order to invest in this country, our infrastructure, to grow our productive capacity, because despite all of this talk from this government about going for growth, they have actively kneecapped the very growth and productivity that they say that they care about. And And these are questions that I put to the minister at the start of her term, at the start of this government's term, asking about when they were intending to crunch the size of government by billions and billions of billions in record pace. Could they ever anticipate that the private sector was going to fill that gap? He obviously then pivoted to something which had absolutely no grounding in reality and using a metaphor around household budgets and kind of distracting a very consummate politician, but not actually answering the question. And in fact, we have seen the realities of that fiscal strategy play out with the contraction, but also with the loss of so many of those young, talented New Zealanders offshore.
Yeah. Worst case economic scenario from a prolonged Iran war suggests 6.6% unemployment and 7.5% inflation, while a majority of Kiwis now believe capitalism is rigged in favour of the rich. Why won't the New Zealand political class tax the rich to fund the social services we so desperately need?
I think it's a matter of vested interests. I think it's a matter of who most people in this place of Parliament tend to spend the majority of their time with. One of the things that I have definitely learnt over the better part of a decade that I've been in this place now is that our country is incredibly stratified in a way that many don't tend to actually realize, when you're walking out and around the street, to actually the point that I was making earlier around the timestamp in 2023 and the 311 households holding more wealth than half of the country. As of just this most recent NBR Rich list, those just over 100 individuals now hold more wealth than around 45% of the country. So you can see just how quickly this inequality is widening. And that is by virtue of the approach of... Actually, I put this to Grant Robertson when he was in the midst of the economic response to the COVID-19 crisis and the lack of intervening fiscal policy to deal with the inequality stimulating effects of that unconventional monetary policy. I asked him whether he considered himself a compassionate conservative on that basis. And obviously, true to form, much like this current Minister of Finance, refused to answer that question.
Beautiful.
But I guess to the core point of your question, Bomber, I think this is a matter of what we consider to be feasible and to be economically and politically possible at this point in time. Yet, funnily enough, to scaffold off the back of that point I made about COVID-19 showed us that all of the things that we had for so long thought were economically or politically impossible, providing housing for those who need it almost overnight, direct payments to those who needed it, flexible working arrangements, all of those things happened immediately, which demonstrated that they were always a matter of political willpower. So I think that this is a matter of rebuilding the sense of what it means to be a New Zealander, to fight for these things, these basic necessities of education, healthcare, housing, access to food, not only for the people who you know and love, but also the people who you don't know. And I'd argue even the people that you don't like.
Yeah. The Greens in their State of the Planet address hammered home the desperate need to get away from fossil fuels and focus on 100% sustainable electrification. Why is this government dragging its heels?
Because it represents fossil fuel interests. I don't really know. I've racked my brain about this as I've sat opposite the Prime Minister in question time and really tried to dig into the logic, if there is anything approaching logic in his answers, let alone addressing the question. And it's really that simple. I do not think that they represent the interests of the vast majority of regular New Zealanders, because the most common sense, evidence-based, logical thing to do in the midst of this fossil fuel crisis, where all of the regular reasons to decarbonise are on steroids, I don't know why the government wouldn't be doing it, other than they don't represent the interests of regular New Zealanders.
Finally, Chloe, I don't think climate change is a scientific debate any longer. It's a culture debate. There are many Kiwis who just don't want to admit the Greens were right all along and can't bring themselves culturally to admit that. What would you say to the climate deniers as we face more and more extreme weather?
Well, I'll tell you what I said in my first AGM as the Green Party co-leader to all of the party faithful, which is that there is no point being right if we're left clinging to our mountains of evidence when the last tree is cut down. And actually, that was an appeal to our party base to get outside of our bubbles, to realise that as much as we love kind of throwing the book at people and going, look, we have all of the evidence, we've got all of the facts on our side. Facts are not necessarily the things that change people's minds, despite what I would love to believe, being such a nerd as I am. So this is where, I don't begrudge regular people for feeling protective and having all of those. All of us have cognitive biases. That's the way that the human brain works.
Yeah.
I think, though, that at this point in human history, when things are so incredibly stressful and difficult for so many New Zealanders, it is really critical that we understand that we're not 5 million random people all running around in competition with each other. We're not actually in competition for survival. We kind of need each other. And this is where I come back to the nation building process that we or the nation rebuilding process that we have to go through, where we have to actually be willing to say that we're willing to fight for a country not only for ourselves, but for our fellow New Zealanders. We have to come back down to the basics and agree on the non-negotiables necessary for all New Zealanders, almost by dint of birthright. And that is, for me, rebuilding of our healthcare system, of our housing, of our schools, and ensuring that we guarantee the basic needs of all New Zealanders are met so that everybody has the opportunity not only to survive, but to thrive.
Thank you, comrade, for your leadership. Thank you for sharing your insight and oversight this evening. We'll talk to you again next month. Thank you.
Next time. See you later.